Hey everyone, today I want to give you a quick overview of one of the most powerful tools in the pro audio workflow, and that is a multiband compressor. I want to cover what it is and what it does, but also give you some ideas on how and when you might want to use it. Before we get started, if you enjoy these videos, you want to support my channel, check out the links in the description. I've got a bunch of sound effects on my website that I'm selling royalty-free for your personal use. I've curated them from my own library so that you can use them in any project you might be working on. I've also got my first course up on Udemy all about building a professional mixing template for all audio work, whether it's as simple as an audiobook all the way up to a major feature film. So check those out, they're in the description. You can also donate if you'd like to. Anything really helps me dedicate more time to this channel, sharing major studio workflows with everyone. Alright, so if you've watched any of my other videos, you're probably familiar with what a compressor is already. If you're not and you want the deep dive, check out the link above. Basically, a compressor allows you to tighten up the dynamics of a signal so you don't have such huge differences in levels. It makes things more consistent. And it does that by reducing the loudest parts of your audio and then boosting the entire section of audio that you've just made a little bit quieter here, so you retain that same loudness and that same energy without clipping or distorting or having really drastic differences in level. Now, a multiband compressor takes that exact same workflow and that exact same idea, and it splits it out across multiple parts of a sound's frequency spectrum. So you're no longer just able to compress the entire audio signal by a given amount, you're able to actually work on individual parts of the frequencies. So if you have really intense low end, like a bass guitar, for example, or maybe some kind of explosion in the distance, for example, you can compress just those low frequencies and leave the rest of the signal alone. Similarly, if you've got a lot of high frequency information, like a really bright acoustic guitar, or maybe some really harsh, shrill metal impacts or something along those lines, you might want to compress just those top level frequencies so that they're not as harsh and leave everything else alone to kind of maintain the character of the rest of the sound. You can do that with a multiband compressor very easily. Let's take a look at a basic compressor. You're going to have a few different parameters across every single one, no matter what you're using. You're going to find a threshold parameter, which allows you to tell the compressor what you consider loud and what you consider quiet. The loud stuff is what the compressor is going to work on and lower. The quiet stuff it's going to leave alone. You've got a ratio parameter where every time a sound goes beyond that threshold that you set and becomes loud, the ratio tells the compressor by how much to reduce that sound. So if you've got a ratio of 3:1, for every 3 dB over that threshold you set, it's going to spit out 1 dB on the other end, so it's reducing it by a factor of 3. You'll find an attack parameter that controls how fast the compressor clamps down on those loud sounds, as well as a release parameter that controls how fast it lets go. Occasionally you'll find a depth parameter that controls the maximum amount of reduction the compressor can actually apply. So generally I try not to reduce a signal by any more than about 6 dB, because that's about where things start sounding unnatural. A depth parameter will allow you to set that maximum and say, don't reduce anything beyond that point, and maintain that natural dynamic. And of course, when you're reducing those louder sections of your signal, you're making your signal quieter, so every compressor has a makeup gain parameter that will then boost that newly lowered signal up to where it used to be and maintain that energy. Let's take a look at one of the most common multiband compressors out there, the Waves C4. The C4's been around forever, and obviously the interface kind of shows that. But all these same parameters that we just talked about are all here. You've got an attack and a release parameter, you've got threshold, you've got makeup gain, and that range parameter is the same thing as the depth parameter that we just talked about. It establishes the maximum amount of gain reduction that each band of this compressor is going to be able to apply. There are a couple of differences with auto release compensation, where you can let the compressor kind of figure it out for itself or dial it all in manually. There's also a way that you can kind of change the character of the compressor, kind of the sonic quality of how it responds to sound, by choosing between opto and electro. And there's a knee control, which basically is how aggressively or smoothly the compressor transitions from not compressing a signal to compressing a signal. The big difference here is obviously that the multiband compressor has 4 different compressors built into it, all split up by frequency. So you can choose the crossover frequency of each section of this compressor based on what sound you're actually working on. If you've got a lot of low end, you might want to open up and compress the low end of your signal separately from all of the rest of your signal. If you've got a lot of top end, same thing, just with the higher frequencies. And of course, if you've got mid-range frequencies that you really want to dial back, like dialogue that's really harsh, or somebody is maybe a little bit nasal in certain qualities of their voice, you can actually use a multiband compressor to control some of those resonances in a person's natural speech without having to reach for an EQ and try and notch things out really specifically every time someone talks. In that way, you can actually use a multiband compressor kind of like you would use an EQ, but it now depends on how loud the signal is coming in, whether things are going to be worked on. With an EQ, you basically just establish that you notch out or you reduce or you raise frequencies, and that's it. There are some more advanced EQs that allow you a little bit more control than that, but generally, what you set is what you're going to get. A multiband compressor allows you to dial in on certain frequencies that are only going to jump up sometimes and only work on them when that happens. So they're really powerful in controlling signals that way. Let's look at a more modern one in FabFilter's Pro Multiband. This is all the exact same information presented in a slightly different way that's a little bit prettier to look at, but all the parameters are the same. And you can add or subtract bands as you see fit. So again, if you've got really specific instances like an explosion sound that has only a couple of frequencies that move around a little bit, you want to compress those a little, then you're able to do that very easily. If you've got cymbals that you need to dial back the top end of, but you want to leave the rest alone, and you only want that to happen on occasion when they get really loud, you can set a multiband compressor to only look at high frequencies and leave everything else alone. One of my favorite uses for a multiband compressor is on dialogue, because dialogue is so variable when somebody is moving closer or further away from a mic, they're turning their head, they're moving around a lot, and generally their performances go from really quiet to really loud depending on what they're doing. This works in both film and audiobooks and podcasting and voiceover, as well as music recording. Putting a multiband compressor on a vocal or a dialogue chain allows you to get a lot more granular control over that dialogue. And again, it's going to be highly variable, so you can set that multiband compressor to only focus in on, say, muddy frequencies that only happen every now and then, somewhere in the range of 200 to 500 hertz, or really low-end frequencies if you're working with somebody who has a very deep voice. You can dial in a compression setting that's only going to work on that and control that low end so it's not overwhelming. Similarly, you can even use a multiband compressor to de-ess a signal by setting a band really, really tightly on sibilant frequencies and dialing them really far back whenever they occur, and that allows you to leave the rest of the spectrum totally alone. Also, multiband compressors generally aren't very resource intensive, so you can put them on any number of tracks that you want, whether you want them on every single unit track of all your dialogue, all your sound effects, or if you just want them on chain tracks where every piece of dialogue is bussed to one single submaster. Well, just put a multiband compressor on it, and it's just going to tighten up your levels a little bit more, make things a little bit more consistent, and again, sound more smooth. Now, finding a place for multiband compression in your workflow is going to take some experimentation, and you're always going to have to use your own ears, of course, but knowing that you have access to the tool and being able to use it is going to open up a lot more possibilities for getting that much better sound quality more quickly and more effectively. So I hope you enjoyed the video and the basic walkthrough. If you did, don't forget to hit like, hit subscribe, ask any questions in the comments below. I'm over on Instagram at AXK, so come follow me over there. And as always, thanks for watching.